There are images of police using violence against peaceful protesters. There are images of police creating confrontations, even attacking defenseless elderly people. We played a video of police knocking over an elderly man with a cane, shooting at the media. These images have gone viral over the weekend. Now, I want to be really clear. I already did a story about how what's going on in America right now is not just about one thing. It's not just about race. It's not only about police. It's not exclusively about capitalism or Trump. This is a massive, multifaceted ordeal. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't look at individual elements. And one of these elements is the idea of police as oppressors versus police as victims, as some have started framing police to be. We are seeing wholesale pepper spraying of peaceful protesters. We've seen members of the media shot with rubber bullets. We saw kids hit with pepper spray. We've seen police ramming police vehicles into crowds. A Dallas woman was hit in the face with a rubber bullet while walking home with her groceries. Police wildly hitting people with batons, in some cases, people walking away from protests. None of this excuses any violent actions by protesters, and there have been horrible actions, including attacking business owners, beating one business owner to within an inch of his life for trying to defend his business, beating a female business owner brutally out in front of her store. We have seen it all. But I want to focus in a little bit here on the police component and talk about it with you. There are people, and I'm friends with some of them on Facebook, I'm seeing it on Twitter. There are people who have immediately taken to painting police as victims. Arguments like, a bad cop may have killed George Floyd in Minnesota, but now innocent police all over the place are being attacked for no reason. And often these arguments end up in debates about numbers, like, well, most police are good. Is it 97% or 99%? Well, is it 99 or 99.3%? And I said earlier in the show, imagine we figured out with some precision what portion of police are the problem, as we might call it, and what portion of police are not. Imagine 99.2% of police are good. Okay, well, I imagine that most of my audience, even if you're okay with property crime in protest, where insurance companies are the ones taking a hit and corporations, I imagine most of my audience is not okay with unprovoked attacks against random police officers who aren't doing anything wrong. If you do believe that for what happened to George Floyd in Minnesota, it's okay to just physically attack an officer in Miami, we're just not on the same page. I think that's the minority of my audience. Does our analysis depend, though, on whether it's 99.2 or 99.3% of police that are good guys in it for the right reasons? Because what really this is about is context and power dynamics. In total, once you concede that most cops are good and doing their job as best they can, often in difficult situations, sometimes dangerous situations, you also have some cops that go into law enforcement specifically because they would love an opportunity to beat the crap out of someone, just like some portion of people go into the military because they like the idea of shooting someone and killing them in some kind of theater of war at some point. That is some percentage. Okay, so then what, right? Whether it's 0.8 or 0.7 or 0.08% of police that are going in because they want to do violence and misbehave and have all the worst intentions, what next? And that's where the more difficult conversations start. Questions like, are the good cops who are just doing their job part of the problem? In that, if you're not part of the solution, are you implicitly supporting the status quo of that small percentage of police that do horrible things and get away with it? To what degree? Should every, quote, good cop quit in protest to show solidarity with the protests, leaving our country to be policed only by the bad cops? What counts as a sign of being complicit? Is silence a sign of being complicit? What power and responsibility do individual police officers have to fix the problem versus police chiefs, versus federal law enforcement agencies, versus police unions that represent officers around the country? Should the good cops be treated respectfully or suspiciously, absent any reason to believe they are one of the bad cops? How should they be treated by protesters, the average person, et cetera? When you start asking these questions, you realize that most of the changes that need to be made are systemic changes. It needs to be much more likely that if you do the wrong thing as a police officer, you will be caught and punished. It's not likely right now in a lot of our society. Just from this weekend, we have dozens, if not hundreds of officers on video doing horrible things. Are we confident they're going to be identified and investigated and charged and punished when it's appropriate? Not really, because if it were more likely that they were held accountable, they would probably change their behavior. That is a systemic issue. A good system will take care of that sliver of police that are doing sick, horrible things. So let's answer the questions one by one. First of all, being a police officer is not like being an accountant, okay? Accountants don't represent communities in the way that police officers do. Accountants don't wield their power with firearms, and accountants don't have a power dynamic relative to their clients the way police officers have a power dynamic relative to the people that they are dealing with. So on the one hand, the good police officers must say much more loudly, these things are not okay, and we're committed to fixing it and changing it. And good for them, many police officers have done exactly that. At the same time, the anger by protesters towards a system of policing that is fundamentally broken in many parts of our country is justified anger. And this is why it's so powerful when police officers get it and say, I'm with you, like the sheriff in Michigan who marched with protesters and the video going viral. And it's important for protesters to know that their anger with the system is justified, and yet it's not okay to go attack random individual cops who have not done anything wrong, which is why it was great to see protesters protecting a police officer Saturday night who had done nothing wrong and was separated from his squad. This is why it was great to see video from, I believe it was Brooklyn last night, with organizers saying, do not interact with the police. We are not here for that. We are here to get our message out. Do not incite violence. If you see anyone inciting violence, call them out. And, you know, in the midst of this, there's this really ugly thing that's going on where there are people sort of making the focus that the protesters are from out of town. And at one point, there was some wrong report that more than half of protesters in some place were from out of town. Another report, it said, it seemed like 1 out of 7 were from out of town. Now, sometimes that could mean the next town over. It's not really a big deal. But the point is, this out of town narrative is being used to imply that you merely have people from other communities who are not coming in to protest because they actually are concerned about police brutality and relations or whatever, but that they are coming in to provoke or to loot or to steal. You could be concerned about what went on and drive from another state. And it also appears to be completely untrue. So we've got to be really understanding of how some of these narratives are being used to distort and discredit real justifiable anger. We also have to recognize the growing number of protests that are saying, we are not here to do violence at all, and we are not here to do violence to the police, but we have to realize that the anger is justified given the systemic dynamics that exist. That's sort of my sense of it right now. I'm glad to hear from you about it as well.